We're now on Chaf Amid Beis, Habe'ina Michtav Veleka. The Torah, in what we mentioned earlier, Shmos Amid Tes, regarding creating the tzitz, says Michtav Pituche Chosam. It has to be Michtav. And according to you, if by making the tzura on the tzitz, they use the same methodology and the same manufacturing process that they use for a dinrei zav, which is called chok tolchos, and they just punched around the outside and the letters were boltos me'aleim, then it should be possible to create a tzitz. How could the brisa compare the asiyas atzitz to the dinrei zav? And again, we have the same answer that we had earlier on Daf Yud Chafam and Aleph, which Rav Ashi is offering now. Kidinrei zav alo kidinrei zav. Kidinrei zav to boleit. You're right, it's boleit. And in that sense, it's very similar to the tzura on a dinrei zav. But lo kidinrei zav to ilu hasam, in creating the coins, the matbeos, which they made with that chosam that we spoke about, migavoy. But hacha mi'avroi. Here, in the case of tzitz, it's me'avroi, which means what? That they turned it inside out, and they looked at the side of the tzitz that was resting on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, and then they were mavlit the osios, klapi the tzad shekenegdo, the side of migavoy, and therefore that's considered a ksiva. It's not osios shenasos me'aleim, but rather is a ksiva of chok yerechas. Now we're getting into the following sugya, and that is, what rights can the Baal retain on the get? So we start with Rava's question to Rav Nachman. Pasav la get al gabi tashel zov. Wow, this is the most expensive get you'll ever see. It was chok yerechos into a tashel zav, a very expensive plate of gold. The Amrullah, but he doesn't want to give up this expensive plate of gold. This kabli gitach vis kabli ksubas. I want to pay you up for the ksuba with this get. It's worth a lot of money. Mal. Can a man use the get as a piron chov for the ksuba? Amalei, everything's fine. Niskabla gita, she's megureshes, v'niskabla ksubasa. So it sounds like Rav Nachman was very calm and cool and collected about this opportunity to both give her a get and use that get as payment of the ksuba. Esvei, Rav is not happy. Now, I was always wondering, Rava asked the question to Rav Nachman, and then he himself quotes a brisa to prove the answer. That's a little bit strange. The brisa says the following: a man writes a get on a tash shel zav, and in this particular case, the letters of the get fit into the basic inner part of the tashel zav, and then there are the margins around it, very wide margins that have no letters on it. His kabli gitech vashar, but the margins lik subasech. Then, because the margins are being used to pay up the ksuba, his kabli gitech vashar lik subasa. Says Rabbi, let's be medayik in the brisa. Taimo, why does the brisa say that the get can be double functioning, and it could also function as a payment to the ksuba, the ika shar? Why? Because in addition to the place where the get was written on the tashel zav, there were margins. There were no osios on the margins. Haleka shar, but in a case where there were no margins, and basically all you have from this gold plate are the osios, lo, he could not be porei the chov. And why is that? Because the Torah says v'nosan, and the Torah teaches us v'nosan matana gemura. He has to give her a matana gemura l'shem gerushin. He cannot use that same matana, namely the get, as piron chol. But if there's something left on the margins, that's not part of the get. That's what you call a makom panui, where there are no letters, that he can give as a piron for the chov. So now Rav Nachman has to defend himself against Rav. And he says the following: you can't ask me a kasha from this brisa. The brisa doesn't contradict me. Why? Hu adin afal gav de lekashar. The brisa is just telling me an extra chiddush here. Really, in truth, even if there was no margins, he could be poreah the chov of the ksuba with this get. But he wants to tell me a bigger chiddush. The afal gav the ikashar, even though when he gives her the get on this tashel zav, and the get does not fill up the entire tas. I omar la, if the Baal says to his wife that the extra margins around the ksiva and the osios of this tashel zav are my payment to the ksuba in, then it becomes a payment for the ksuba. Ilolo, but if he just gives her the get, he doesn't make any stipulation about paying the ksuba, then it cannot be used as payment to the ksuba. It's part of the get. My timer. What is the reason that in low piresh, if he doesn't say it explicitly, for l'shei piron, the woman is zocheh the entire get, and he has to pay the ksuba? And the answer is avira de megiltu. We view the margins as part and parcel of the get. And if he doesn't say specifically, I want to use those margins as piron, then it becomes part and parcel of the get, and v'nasan means he gives her over the get. Now we get into the sugya of what happens if the Baal gives the get to his wife and he wants to retain ownership on the get. The paper on which the get is written is mine. So all I'm giving you are abstract letters. The Bryce says, this is called osios parchos ba'avir. He has to give her a get. He has to give her a parchment on which the osios are inscribed. But just the osios, that's a davar shein bo mamish. That can't be considered a sinas get. Now he quotes here the Stipler, who says the following: L'chora, this is against the Gemara of Kosav get al Isurya. No, you remember Shalchu Misam, and the get is kosher. So it means that she doesn't have to receive anything of value. So if he says that the niyar remains mine and she didn't make an acquisition over the niyar get, it should be no worse than Isurya no, which we said is kosher. Says the Stipler, when he says haniyar shali, that creates a chisaron in the sense that the Baal is being ma'akev, he's holding for himself the niyar. And the Torah says sefer krisus. Sefer krisus means it's got to be a separation between him and her. If he still retains the niyar for himself, and this we'll see, I'm just stating my own, later on in Masechet Gittin, there's something called Mashicha biyado, where he has a string that's attached to the get, and he keeps holding on to the string. And the Rambam in Perek Ches Milchus Gerushin says that Haniyar Shali Eina Megureshes Mishum She'ein Zeh Krisus. It's a chisaron in krisus. However, if he says this is your get al menashe tachziri lias haniyar, this is what's called a maton al menas lahachzer, which is shmo matona reizu megureshes, and when she returns the niyar I get to the husband and fulfills the t'nai, then the gerushin is chal, because matona manas lahachzer shmo matona. Boy, Rav Papa raises the following suffix: harezeg yitech haniyar shebein shita l'shita bein teva l'teva mat. He wants to retain ownership not on the entire get, but just on the empty spaces of the get, between one word and the other, between one line and the other. And in analyzing the suffix and why Rav Papa vacillates back and forth, the Rashba writes that the svara of Rav Papa to passel the get is because that's not called krisus. He's still taking the niyar of the get back and holding it for himself. The other side is to say, well, he's not holding on to the entire get. He's giving her the osios, and therefore it's creases. Might teku, and we left it as an outstanding suffix. Frekta Gemara, I don't understand the suffix of Rav Papa. V'teipuk le. We should passel this get. This sefer echad amar achmana v'lo shnayim u'shlosa svarim. If he's removing the diyar by retaining ownership between the osios, then every single letter is a separate get, is a separate sefer. And the Torah says v'kosav lo sefer creases. And sefer is in the singular echad v'lo shnayim u'shlosha svarim. I don't know why it has to add shlosha svarim. Okay. Lo tzricha. What was the suffix of Rav Papa? The Gemara is now going to reinterpret the suffix of Rav Papa. Dima ore. The osios of the ksuba of the get are very long, and one line enters into the other line. Like, let's say, for example, you have a lamed, right? A lamed has a very high, tall head, so to speak, and it enters into the shura above it, which in the Sefer Torah is a problem, but not in a get. Or, for example, the letter kuf has a long leg, that goes down, and it enters into and touches the line below it. So in such a case, you cannot cut the get between the shuros because you're going to enter into and be pogea in the osios. And words were attached one to the other because the sofer made letters, the ends of words, like the letters at the end of words, into very long, long and wide letters. So there was, the first letter of a word would touch the word that came before it, or the last letter of this word went into the word that came after it. So there's no possibility of cutting out between the words without being pogea in the osios. And that's where Rav Papa had his suffix. Boy, Rami Bar Chama Yumuksakim the Eved Shushalo. We had a chazaka that this Eved belongs to Reuven. The get kosav al yado, and on the arm of the Eved, there was a get that was written. And we learned in the Mishnah back on Daf Yutes that you could write a get on the hand of an Eved, and you give the Eved over to the woman as a gift, and she's megureshes. And now she brings the Eved in front of us, and she claims that the Baal gave her the Eved as a gift, and he was megarisha with this get that's written, inscribed on the arm of the Eved. She doesn't have any edim to prove the Mesiras Haget. In this case, the Mesiras Eved. It's only her word. Mal. Can we believe her and assume that the Eved was given to her through Mesira? And even in the absence of Edi Mesira, we have an umdan of Mesira, and therefore she's Megureshes. Mi Amrin, do we say, Aknuye Aknile? The Baal gave her the Eved, and the fact that she's holding on to the Eved means for sure that the Baal was makna the Eved. O Dilma, should we say no? An Eved is an animate object, meaning it's alive. He has his own locution, his own feet. Uminafshik oil. It doesn't prove a thing. The fact that she's holding on to this Eved and she brings it into Bezdin proves absolutely nothing. The Eved himself came into her rishus, towards the Isha. And basically what the Gemara is asking is that the fundamental halacha of Tfisas Bal Ashtar, does that apply in the case of an Eved? Amar Rava says, I don't understand what Rami Bar Chama is vacillating about. Typically, the get is possible, even if we know clearly that the Baal gave the Eved to the Isha, the Ksav Sheyachol is dayefu. In a get, like any other shtar, we need that it be muchach mitocham, that we can absolutely establish the authenticity of the signatures on the shtar. And the same thing in a get. And if the get is written on the arm of an eved, it could get erased, or you could easily counterfeit the signatures. And therefore, it's possible that there was a Tanai written on this get, and she erased the Tanai, and we can't see it. How can we allow for validating this gerushin? So Gemara says, Rava says that your apostle. What about the get that was written on the arm of an eved is apostle? What about Kasha Masnisa? The Mishnah says that Kosval Yad Shel Eved No Sein Los HaEved, and that's a valid gerushin. So the Gemara clarifies. Bishlei Masnisim Lo Rava Lo Kasha. I understand the Mishnah is not shver according to Rava, and even though Rava maintains that a get on the arm of an eved is a ksav sheyochel is dayev, the Mishnah is talking about a case of be'edei mesira, that there were edei mesira to testify that the Baal gave this eved over to the Isha. We don't need a ksav sheni yochel is dayev. Because we're going according to the sheet of Rabbi Lazar that Edi Masira Karte. What did I say? I meant to say we don't need a ksav she'eno yochel is dayev. That's what I meant to say. I don't know if I said that. So it means that according to Rabbi Lazar, there's a brand new concept of a shtar. The shtar has no edim on it. The shtar could be a bluff. The whole thing was a counterfeit. There are no edim, and we can't verify the edim because there are no edim signed on it. It's just edim masira. But it's a shtar kinyan and not a shtar raya. Right? Like the Mishnah says at the beginning of Kiddushin, v'kones atzmo b'shtei drocha b'getuv misabal. So get is a hakna. She's kona herself. And in shtar kinyan, Rabbi Loza says edi masira karsa. And that creates the chalos kinyan. Elo Rami Bar Chama kasha. Now, Rami Bar Chama's suffix. Let's go over Rami Bar Chama one more time. Rami Bar Chama asked the question, "Haymuzakim be'eved shushalo beget kosva yoda v'arei yotze mitachas yoda." He's talking about a case where there were no Edi Masira. If there were Edi Masira, then Pshita that the get would be Chal, as the Mishnah establishes. But Rami Bar Chama wanted to know what happens in the absence of Edi Masira. In other words, we have a ksav sheyochel is dayev. How could Rami Bar Chama possibly entertain the possibility that the get is kosher? And the Gemara answers, Rami Bar Chama nam lo kash b'ksovis kaka. We're talking about a tattoo. And in the case of a tattoo, the ink goes underneath the skin in a way that it's irremovable. So it's eksav she'ena yochel is dayev. Hashtados is lahachi masnisa nami lo tikshe. We shouldn't ask a kasha from the Mishnah. It's a get sheyochel is dayev, and how could the Mishnah be machshir a get that's written on the arm of an eved? And the answer is b'ksovas kaka. My havi Allah. What's the final ruling with regard to the suffix of Rami Bar Chama? Toshmadi Omrei Shlokish HaGodros Elem Chazaka. This is a sugya Bava Basra in the third parak. And when you have animate objects, there's no chazaka. The tfisa doesn't prove a thing because maybe these godros, these animals, roamed into his rishos. So possession here is not a proof that he owns it. And therefore, if the woman is holding on to an eved, she's not believed to say that the Baal gave her the eved. Maybe the eved just walked in, roamed into her rishos. Boy, Rami Bar Chama, another suffix of Rami Bar Chama, we have a luach. some sort of a plate, and we know it's hers, v'get kosev oleha, and there's a get that's inscribed on the luach, v'arei yotzes v'tachis yada. Can she prove, Ma'u mi amrina knuyak nisalei, this is a valid get that came from her husband, O Dilma, or should we say lo yada la knuye? She doesn't know that this get has to be the Baal's get, so that she would be makna and transfer ownership over her tavla to the Baal. And therefore, she never had any sort of das makna to be makna the luach to the Baal. And therefore, this is not considered nesina, and she's not megureshes. Amar Abaye Toshma, I have a Mishnah Masechet Edios. Af hu, even Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, Heid al kfar koton shayibitzad Yerushalayim. He tells us a story and he testifies about a small village next to Yerushalayim. There was an elderly scholar there. The Hoya Malve L'chol Bnei Akfar. He was the rich guy in the town, and he used to extend loans to all the people in that town, in that village. The Kosev B'Ksav Yodo V'Acherim Chosmu. He took his own piece of paper and he wrote down that I so-and-so, meaning the Love, borrowed or owe such and such a sum to the Zaken. And he was machtim to aid him on these shtaros. So what was the suffix? And v'mayha be'inon sefer mikna v'leka. The shtar has to be a sefer mikna. That means the mischayev, in this case the lova, has to be makna the shtar over to the malva. But here, in this case of the IOU notes of the Zaken in the Kfar, Koton al Yad Yerushalayim, there he owned the shtar. And the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, Perek Lamed Beis says, "V'akach es sefer mikna." And the Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Tes derives from that pasuk in Yirmiyahu that the mocher, the mocher in this case is like the love, the mocher who's being makna his karka, he's got to write his own shtar. And the love who's creating a shibud and his chayvus to the malva, he has to write his own shtar. So why would the Rabbanan machshir the shtar of the Zaken, which did not belong to the love, but on the contrary, belonged to the malva? Says Abaye, the only way of explaining this story that's told and recorded in Masechet Edios is to assume that the Zaki was makna the shtar over to the mischayev, over to the lova or the mocher. In the case of mechira, that's not the case, and the Zaki knew that the shtar has to go over to them and then he'll get it back. So we're not going to assume that he didn't have in mind to be makna the shtar to the lova, and he's just lending it to the lova. No, he's makna to the lova, and therefore it becomes sefer mikna. And now Rava rejects the raya of Abaye. Omar Rava, umay kusha. What was your question when you said that, even if the Dasa Isha was not to be makna that luach that she owns to the Baal, but rather to lend it to him for writing the get, I wouldn't ask any questions and raise any contradictions from the Mishnah and Edios. On the contrary, Dilma perhaps, and here we turn to Daf Chafal, of Zaken shining. In the case of his Zaken, he's a scholar. The Yodel Aknuye, he certainly was enough of a scholar to understand that in order for this shtar to be valid, he's got to be makna the shtar itself, make it into a sefer mikna by being makna the shtar over to the lova. And therefore, Chachamim were machshir shtaros. But that doesn't prove anything about the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama in a get that was written on the tavla of the Isha. She doesn't know, she's not an expert in these dinim, she's not knowledgeable enough to realize that she has to be makna the Tavla completely over to the Baal so that he can be Makayim v'nosam b'yada. And therefore, says Rav, I'm going to have to find an alternative proof in order to answer up the suffix of Rami Bar Chava. So this is where we'll end here on the top of Daf Aleph. And let me wish you a great day. Thank you so much.